Good morning, everyone. We'll give it another minute. Let people join in, and then we'll get started with our spring webinar with 34 degrees outside, and we're having our spring webinar.
My father-in-law told me that it snowed in West Virginia so much that it actually covered their porch yesterday. Yeah.
Wow, we are fortunate. We have the man with the square feet online.
Morning, everybody.
Mr. John Schwartz, how are you?
I am very, very, very good, Greg. Thank you so much.
You're here to learn all about decluttering your database environment. That's great.
Well, I got to do something.
There you go.
I'll hire you to do it, you know.
That's right. Well, I just run this show. John and Michael will be the ones. They're the brains behind this entire operation. So
okay,
don't let anyone tell you anything different.
I'll let them declutter me.
Right.
We're both in trouble.
Yeah, we just keep the brooms fixed and the mops dry.
That's it? Yeah.
It actually tells you to sweep it up and clean it up and take care of all of that. I get it.
Right.
Exactly. You didn't a little bone for lunch. I got it.
Exactly. Well, with to respect everyone who's been here promptly and on time, I'm going to go ahead and let's get started. So welcome, guys, to our spring webinar, the digital decluttering, a guide to organizing your database systems. It's 34 degrees outside. I'm looking out the window. This doesn't feel like spring, but it's heading towards spring. And as you guys know, in Richmond, Virginia, spring lasts for about a week, and then it turns hot and humid. So that's about all the spring we'll get. I'm Greg Samuels. I'm the CEO of Solvaria. For those of you who don't know us, there's plenty of great information on our website, solvaria.com, but I will just summarize to say we are a full-service database services provider and a strategic leadership provider. So when you think of data and databases, please think of Solvaria. And when you think of strategic leadership and running your IT and your technology shop and strategy, think of Solvaria. When you think of infrastructure, you should think of one of our great partners, CodeBlue Technology. They are the co-hosts of this seminar, and we will have three sessions. The first session is John Whitehead, who is our practice lead in the SQL Server area, talking about databases and digital and decluttering your database environment. Session 2 is Michael Bergamo from CodeBlue. He will be presenting about cloud sprawl. And then I will come back in for a panel discussion. We are fortunate enough to have a couple of senior leaders here. We have Karen Inman, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Versa, and we also have Andy Featherstone, who is a data architect at Retail Data, customers and partners of ours, and they've got some great things to say. So we'll lead a Q&A with them. Speaking of Q&A, please use the chat feature throughout our presentation. It will be moderated by my team. If you don't know where the chat is and go to meeting, it's the little bubble up at the top. You click that, you'll open the chat window. While we're giving the presentation, I'll ask everybody mute themselves and turn your camera off just to save yourself some bandwidth and make the presentation run smoothly. If you do have a question, and we do pick it up in the chat, and it's during one of the sessions, and one of our people will interject and ask the question of the speaker. We will be recording this presentation, and we'll provide our presenters' contact info at the end of the sessions for references. And if anybody wants copies of the session, we'll make that available via the recording, which will be up on a site, as well as we can send the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce John Whitehead. Again, he's our SQL Server lead for the Solvaria's data practice. I would love to give a long bio on John, but I will just say John has been doing database work and has been involved with SQL Server way before I was probably born. So John, I will turn it over to you, and good luck and welcome everybody.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you're having a good morning. So far, you got your breakfast. Everybody's got the coffee cup ready to go. And as Greg said, I have been doing database work since the early 80s. I've been working with SQL Server Pure since the first production release of SQL Server, which was SQL Server 4.0. Please interject your questions in the chat, like Greg said, at any time during the presentation. So let's get started. Just the title slide. So the agenda we're going to be covering today and notes are, please ask any questions. When you have it, put it in the chat. We'll take it and answer it as we go, so you don't have to try to remember your questions to the end. Presentation, like Greg said, is being recorded. And we also ask that everybody turn off your cameras and mute yourself to save bandwidth for the presentation. First thing we're going to cover is auditing your systems, how to do that. We're going to cover some little notes about how to take care of that. The second thing we're going to do is talk about consolidating your database environment. And then the third piece will be right-sizing your licensing requirements. The kind of number 2 and number 3 kind of fall hand in hand, and they relate to each other very well. So. One of the decluttering rules that we use around my house, and I know I've heard it a lot of people, if you're not going to use something within the next 30 days, either take it back or get rid of it. That's a great way to keep your clutter down. It works in your house. It also works in your digital world too. If you, we'll cover different things there. One of the things we need to keep asking ourselves in the IT world is, do we really need these laptops, workstations, servers that we haven't used for years hanging around? They are a treasure trove of information if somebody breaks in and takes them, because I can almost guarantee you that the hard drives have not been wiped, not reformatted, but actually wiped, so that they are hiding any information that's on them. Another thing we have, it's in the IT community, I guess it's something that we as IT leaders and IT workers do on a regular basis, is we hold on to old software. Why do we need installs of Office 2010 when the entire corporation is on Office 365? Why do we need that software tying up network space, sitting on an install directory somewhere, or 2 or 3 install directories scattered across the network? Why do we need that stuff on the network tying up space? In that also, we need to make sure that we look for old RDBMS systems. Like, you know, we're running on SQL Server 2019 because, you know, we've all upgraded to the latest version of SQL Server, but then we've still got installs and service packs and cumulative updates going all the way back to 2005 or SQL 6.5. Why do we need all that software there? We need to declutter that. We need to get rid of it. One of the reasons why is because if you've bought that and purchased it, or it's come through your software licensing, your premium licensing agreement, it's got your license embedded in it. And if somebody gets that and installs it, the Microsoft is going to show that you're still running that software somewhere as a license is being used for it. So we need to get rid of that stuff and get it out of the way. to ask yourself if any of these questions are familiar or statements are familiar. One of the biggest ones I hear is, yeah, we know that's legacy system, and we know we don't use it, we got to keep it, you know, just because we may have to go to it at some time in the future. Corporate retention policies are there for a reason. They're there for legal reasons. They're there for audit reasons. And you've got to worry about that stuff, because if an auditor comes in and they just love to find these treasure troves of old, outdated information, because if they find it, they can use it. And that's why we go through the process of creating these retention policies, so that we can clean our systems, and it actually protects ourselves from this. Another thing one of the biggest problems I have in the database world is that every time we get a new off-the-shelf system, that vendor says we have to have a standalone instance and a standalone VM for our database. But do they really? We need to ask those questions. There's two things there that I always ask a vendor when they're trying to set up, is like, can this database be hosted on a shared instance or on an instance with other databases? We may just need to increase resources a little bit, but why should we stand up a whole license, another Windows license, another VM, everything for just one software package? This is another great step in consolidating, is get all these third-party vendor packages on their own, off their own systems and into a consolidated system. Another very important question to ask vendors, and about 90% of them really hate to get asked this question, is what is the minimum security requirements for your application? And what are the minimum security requirements you need to install your package? They don't need SA rights probably, but they'll tell you they do, but try to break it down so you can get bare minimum. Security, so that's part of cleaning up your security, which is also a very big nightmare in the IT world. Think of it this way. If you go to a store and you buy a pair of pants, and on that pant, it's got for care, the care instruction says, these must be kept in a closet by themselves to prevent wear and tear while it's rubbing against another pair of clothing. We would absolutely think that vendor or that manufacturer was crazy, but we accept it wholeheartedly from these software vendors. Most of them that I found, when you ask the questions and you push them, there is no problem with their databases running side by side with something else, as long as they get the resources that they need. This is not a bad thing in the IT world. If somebody comes in and you have no piles of old laptops and servers there, you don't have a box full of this rat's nest of cables that'll never be used again. You don't have that. So if you're not cluttered, or if you're not packing stuff back in the back, it's a good thing when you start worrying about security and auditing, fire hazards, information security by not having all the hard drives and stuff sitting around. So it's a good thing to have a clean workspace and not be a pack rat in the IT world. Now we're going to move into auditing our systems, which is by far the most daunting task when you start down this road of declutter. And I believe a lot of us don't declutter our digital world is because it is such a daunting task, because we don't know what we have. And remember, corporate retention policies are your friend. They are not your enemy. They make your life easier when it comes to digital information. And when do I throw this away? When do I get this off? When do I delete this data? Your corporate retention policy will tell you that. And if your retention policy only covers email or only covers file and a file share, get them to cover how much data do we need to keep in our systems. If we're getting data in our systems at, we're growing at a terabyte a year, why do we need to keep 20 years worth of data in the database when it's not going to be used? Why keep it there? Archive it off, get it off the system. One of the ways to audit your systems, the first step is have your network team, or it works best if they are a domain administrator, run a scan on your system for all the instances of RDBMSs running on your system. And I'm not talking about just SQL Server. I focus on SQL Server, but I'm talking about all RDBMSs. Make sure you cover the freeware databases, the freeware RDBMSs like MariaDB and MySQL and all this other stuff, because you can at some point, and history has proven that at some point those become a licensed product if they grow. MySQL used to be free. You can download it free now, but you're going to pay if you have to go maintenance it. And if you don't know it's out there, you don't know why somebody's doing it. Or they may be developing an application using MySQL and you have no production MySQL in your environment. We see that quite a bit with these freeware systems like MariaDB and Cosmos and things like that. They're hard to control sometimes, and it's just because they're free. So people think they can just run wild with them. There are several applications out there. You can run Landsweeper, SolarWinds will do it, System Center. There are PowerShell queries that will crawl through your network and tell you everywhere there's a SQL Server running. Get those run, and like I say, they work best when you have them run by someone who either is on a database administration team or someone with domain administrative privileges. Run an inventory of all your databases. This is the one that gets us most of the time. I'm doing a turnover with an organization that I've worked with for 6 years now, and they're turning over to an offshore management team to handle all their IT work. And when we got 87 SQL Server instances, but we got 700 databases. And a lot of those databases are duplicated. They may be the same database, maybe on 10 different systems. Why do we need that database on 10 different systems? That's why we need to keep this audit running. And I would say at least once a year, have the DBAs run an audit of all your databases and get rid of all those databases that are, they've been restored to a date on the name so that they could do a research of a specific problem. Get rid of those databases, because if you're not careful, those databases are being backed up. So you're not only wasting space on your servers, you're wasting space on your backup drives, because you're backing up a database that never changes. So get it off the system unless it's being used, or if it's not going to be used in 6 months, but you've got to keep it around, back it up, get it off the system, and store the backup somewhere so that if it's needed, you can restore that backup. But at a certain point, it's going to become useless. I mean, I also work with a company, they've got copies of their database they used to migrate when they migrated from SQL 2000 to 2005. Well, they're on 2019 now. Why do you need those backups there? You're not going to go back to them. So why do we need to keep them hanging around? It's a point, and it's data and a place where people can get into to steal your information. So it's a security hazard also if you don't keep your systems decluttered, and your backups and your log files, all that stuff needs to be taken care of. Run it, and that's what I was talking about just a second ago. Run an inventory of all your backup locations, all your database backups, your error log files, your log files. Another big key point that you might want to take a look at is look at your mail logs that are recorded in your database as it's sending out email. all those emails are logged. And we need to make sure that we can declutter that unless we have a compliancy regulation that states we need to maintain this. But even like the IRS, you only need to maintain your financial records for 7 years. So why do you have a box that's 20 years old with all your financial stuff sitting in it? Same way with our databases. Why do we need that there if compliance says we don't have to have it there? Get rid of it, declutter it. It's less we have to inventory, and it's less we have to worry about in case, God forbid, we have a breach and they get a hold of some of this. Need to look at one of the clients that I work with has a term that they use, and I love it. It's called toxic assets. If the OS is no longer in support, it's a toxic asset. That OS is no longer being patched. It's no longer being secured. It's no longer being updated. RDBMSs are the same way. If they are so outdated that the manufacturer is not putting out security patches anymore for them, they're not patching it if there's problems, it's toxic. Get it out of your environment. Either move the databases to a newer version. If they've got to stay there for some reason and you still use them, see if you can upgrade. There's tools, and we as Solvaria will be happy to work with you on managing these migration projects and getting these old toxic assets out of your environment. Disk drives on these systems, treasure trove of information. If old databases are hanging there, you can read some databases with a text editor. If you can open them, you can pull information out. So that's one of the things you have to worry about. A lot of this information, unless you're running some type of at-rest encryption, that data can be pulled straight from the hard drive, straight from the raw files. We've got a question here. If your company doesn't have a retention policy, then push them to get one. If you're starting to clean up data, ask your CIO, what is our retention policy? How old do I have to keep this data? Ask them that question and push them. Do your due diligence to clean your systems up. As long as you've got an email chain where you're asking these questions, you're doing your job. And then it falls on them to create these policies so that you can keep your systems decluttered. You can reduce the unusable or unused, useless disk space that's being tied up with these old information. Does that answer your question?
Well, John, I just wanted to chime in around that, which is also that it's the CIO the CIO can work with the company to develop those retention policies, but it's usually a collaboration with legal and with other departments to come up with what the corporate retention policies are. So it's not just the IT group who has to come up with those retention policies. And if you don't have a legal group, there's certainly outside counsel so it's usually a combination between legal, accounting, and IT to come up with retention policies around records.
Right, and that's a good point. The last word you said there. A lot of corporate retention policies, they cover files, they cover email, but they don't cover data. How long are we supposed to keep our data on our systems? So thanks, Greg, for that. The next step is we're going to move into, consolidating our database environment. I'm going to say it again. Corporate retention policies are your friend. They are not your enemy. That somebody has already decided when you can get rid of data, go with it. Follow the flow. A lot of people run into this consolidation issue with their databases systems, and a lot of that comes from third-party vendors. But we also, as we're doing with auditing, that's why that step was earlier, is you have to know what you have before you can plan to consolidate. You have to know what's there. So you can figure out, okay, what's the usage of these databases? Can we take these 10 servers and put them on one SQL server because these databases are not being used? Now you've reduced your overhead, you've reduced your Windows licensing, you've reduced your load on your VM with having, all these CPUs reserved out that you don't need or you don't use. That's decluttering this and consolidating your databases can help solve some other environmental issues that you have at your corporation. Look for multiple copies of the same database. That's when you do that, make sure that you also ignore any of the system databases that are required by the RDBMS, and make sure you ignore any of your database administration databases that are pulling data, or your auditing databases, or things like that. You may have an audit set up, which we have an auditing process that we set up on clients that want it, and then we build a DB audit database on each SQL server that's running that process. So that database is going to be duplicated, but there's none of the same data in it. It's all different. Another big thing we see is every time a new development issue takes place, well, we need a new development environment for this. Well, then why do you have 5 developers and you've got 15 development environments? Why do we need that? We don't. You have to be careful also, and now please understand I'm not picking on developers, but sometimes development systems, I have one client that has tightened the security down so tight on their dev systems that developers, they're just saying, I'm just going to get a copy of the database, restore it on my laptop, and work with it there. Well, now you've got all this corporate information, and some of it could be PHI sitting on all these laptops that once they stop being used are now piled in a corner. So that's why this is so important. And it is, I'm sorry guys, it is a very daunting task to undertake this. And you make a lot of people mad. I had one client at one time that they went from about 170 SQL servers down to 15 because they consolidated. And they consolidated as in keeping track of the systems. They would send out a list, we're going to turn these systems off. If anybody has a problem, let us know. We're going to turn them off by this date. When that date hit, they turned those systems off. And if nobody complained in 30 days, they got rid of it. Completely got rid of it. And it's a very harsh way to do it, but it helped them tremendously with disk space, utilization, server sizes, server numbers, all that stuff. And I'm sure Michael's going to get a lot more deeper into that too. So determine databases what are required to be online. This is another thing. You may have a database out there that you need. It's running online, but nobody touches it. If it's got to be there for some reason and it's not being used, turn it off. Take it offline. Detach it until somebody needs it. You can reattach it and keep going with it. But get it off the system. That way, if you do have a breach of some site, they don't have these databases all sitting there online. They can't get to them because they're offline. This is one of the biggest consolidation questions that we have, and it's also very difficult to do sometimes. Out of all your databases, which ones can be hosted on the same database instance or the same database server if you have single instance servers? What can be put together? If you've got all these historical databases that are just there for archival purposes that legal or finance or someone like that cannot remove from the system, why can't you build an archive system? Put tight security on it, put all those databases on this one archival system that holds nothing but outdated data if you have to keep it around. Get it off of your production systems. Free up that production resource for actual production work.
Hey, John. Do you think this
Yeah.
issue has gotten better or worse? Because back in the day, when a vendor came in and wanted you brought in a new piece of software from a vendor, they made you buy a physical server, and so that it made it a lot more. There was a barrier there where you had to wait for hardware, et cetera. Now with the world of virtual machines, has this gotten better or worse? Because
Worse. I think it's gotten worse. And this is the one reason, and just because of what you said, because of cloud virtualization. It's like, hey, let's spin up another cloud VM. And I'm sure Michael's going to cover this more in depth too, but I think it's actually gotten worse. I think with having to purchase hardware by the vendors, sometimes it gets those packages turned off because we're not going to buy a new server just for one package. But I think it started getting better, but now we're also starting to see what Michael's going to cover is cloud sprawl is so fast because of some of the reasons that Michael's going to talk about, but I think it's actually gotten worse, Greg. I think it's actually gotten worse.
Okay, thank you.
Get your databases off. Find out what can be hosted on the same server. And like I said, we will be glad to help you guys out, come in with a project to help you declutter and take that off of your staff people, and we'll be glad to help you through this thing. It kind of fits into Greg's question here is, if the vendor says they need their own systems, push them. Why do you need your own system? What is the reason for you having your own system? You know, make them justify the system to you, and then include that. Make sure you include that when you're trying to get funding for that system. Make sure that you include, oh, okay, wait a minute here. They've got to have their own VM. So what's our corporate cost going to be to maintain this other VM just for this one package? Because that can add up to a lot in the long run. I mean, if they come up and you spin up a VM up in the cloud to handle this, and now you go from a simple basic system VM with 4 procs and 8 gigs of RAM for SQL Server, and you've got to spin that thing up to 3 levels above that to handle this software package, you could be winding up spending $1,000 a month just for this one system, for this one software package. So it could also lead you to that decision: do we keep this on site? Do we keep it on-prem? Or do we push it to the cloud? You've got to weigh those corporate costs, which is also part of decluttering, reducing your budget, reducing your bottom line. Right-sizing your licenses. We get this question a lot, and I'm going to say it again. Corporate retention policies are your friend. They help with all of these pieces, decluttering, and also they help a lot with your licensing agreements, because if you can get rid of systems, you reduce your licensing need. If you can put those systems on the same server, databases on the same server, you reduce your licensing cost. But you can't do that until you have an inventory of what RDBMSs you have, how many instances, and the databases on those instances. You got to have the basics. One of the first targets that we should look at for consolidation or getting rid of is our toxic instances of the servers, of the OSs or the RDBMSs. Look for what's toxic. And it's simple queries to run to find out what versions of SQL are running, what additions are running, what patch level they're at. It's a very simple query to do that, which we'll be glad to help you with. But that should be your first target, is cleaning your toxic assets out of your network.
Hey, John, how do you know something's supported anymore? Like, how do you know when a server is going out of maintenance?
The vendor, or especially Microsoft, because that's what we focus on is Microsoft, but they will publish out of service dates. This moves out of mainline service on this date. It moves out of extended support on this date. As we had last summer, SQL 2008 ran out of mainline support. It ran out of extended support. Unless you bought an Azure VM and put it there, then they would give you 3 more years of extended support on it. But it doesn't mean that the database will stop working. It means that they will not be patching it anymore. So it becomes toxic because it becomes a target, because it's not secure like the rest of this stuff was. But the vendors will publish those support dates. And that's what we do. We look up when we run these inventories, we find out what's currently running and look where Microsoft has published, said, okay, ended, extended support on RTM, SQL Server 2000, whatever, ended on this date. The latest service pack is Service Pack 4. The extended service expiration date for Service Pack 4 is this. So that's why it's important to know what service pack level, cumulative update level these things are running at, because the vendors publish that. Did that answer your question, Greg?
Yep, thank you.
This is one of the keys to reducing licensing costs is move these independent vendor required things all onto the same server. Move it onto a utility instance. Like we have some clients we consolidated, and LandSweeper and Zendesk and all these other tools, all these tool databases are on a utility instance that handles all those. Instead of a separate instance for each one of them, like the vendor's request, we just force the vendor, say, no, you're not getting a separate instance. We're going to put your database on this server. And then don't let them have SA privileges. Only give them the privileges they need to install their software or install it for them. I've had many vendors, when I've questioned on this, they said, we'll send you a script that builds the database and you take care of that. And sometimes when you push them, they're more than happy to comply. We can host things from different versions. Like we'll go into SQL Server right now. Is I can host a SQL Server 2005 compatible database on a 2019 server. Now, it doesn't take it. I'm not able to take advantage of any of the performance increases or anything in the new features from 2019 because the database is running behind. But this is a question you have to cover with the vendor: is can their database run in a compatibility level, vice the new version of SQL? Can it run on 2019 but stay in 2008 compatibility? Will it operate there? So a lot of times that question will lead you into this: yes, you can upgrade your software and your RDBMS, but this has to stay in this compatibility mode to run. But you need to ask the vendor that, because they're the ones who are required to test and make sure that it'll run okay in that compatibility mode. I know we've all gone through this one before. Delete it means delete it. Especially if the business tells you delete that, run with it. Delete it. You know, you've got email chain, you've got something showing that somebody way above you has said, get rid of this information, get rid of it. You know, I've worked with organizations before that had the burn barrels were boxes, and all your work notes had to go in that box, and they would date and seal that box at the end of that year and keep it for 7 years and then shred the box and get rid of it. But they very strict on compliance and retention and preventing auditors from getting hold of data that they shouldn't have. Okay, that kind of concludes mine. Is there any questions?
So, John, I guess I'm to take from this, you're kind of a fan of corporate retention policies. The whole time I've been in this data decluttering or digital decluttering is one of the things that we fight with the most, and licensing requirements. You know, well, we don't want to buy another, we don't want to buy another enterprise license of SQL Server. Why? You know, if it has to have its own. I've had one client
and they have one production server instance or one production SQL server, but we're running 3 different instances on it because the vendors require a separate instance for their application. So all we do is we get a new one, they've got to require it. So we said, okay, this one's required. What's the minimum resource requirements by the vendor? So we spin up another instance, and then we may just add resources to the server to meet that need. And then instead of buying an entire server license for enterprise, we just buy another two core pack for it.
Yeah. I think maybe touch on the, when you do the licensing audit, we've had customers where they were running enterprise just because SQL Enterprise, just because somebody told them to run SQL Enterprise, and it turned out, I know with later versions of SQL Server that you could actually enter some of the enterprise features they needed were rolled into standard, which was a significant cost savings.
It is, and it's going to continue to do that. But yeah, we look at that. We have a very simple query that we can run that tells us, are there any enterprise features being used on this database platform? And if there's not, it's sad to say, but to downgrade from enterprise to standard is a reinstall, which you can also plan because you're consolidating. We need to migrate forward, so let's buy the next version of SQL, consolidate this server instance, and put it there. But we can tell you that, and that's one of the things we do on the licensing audit is we tell you which ones we think can be taken away from the enterprise or the biggest cost. And also keep in mind that when you're looking at these free databases, SQL Server Express Edition, Oracle has a free edition, and MySQL does have a free edition, but they've got some restrictions on them. But they're within the top 5 of every list that you can find on freeware databases. So yeah, we definitely want to look at reducing the edition of SQL Server if we can. We also, this is another big thing to look at too, is we also see a lot of people running a licensed version of SQL Server, standard or enterprise, for their development systems. Microsoft provides a free developer edition of SQL Server, which you only have to have, I think the latest requirement is you have to have an MSDN license for each user that's using that developer edition. But it's free. It's an enterprise equivalent free database system for developers, designed just for developers. You're not allowed to run any production load on it.
I think as CIOs, what our CIOs see is the value of having an audit, a license audit by one of your consultants is better than having the license audit conducted by Oracle or Microsoft, because like Microsoft has, what's that called? Is that the map tool, John?
They do have that. It's an extremely complicated tool to run. I've run that in a couple environments. It's hard to set up. It's very intrusive.
Yeah, I think if Microsoft gets involved or Oracle gets involved in your audit, then basically you don't have the opportunity there to consolidate. They're just going to send you a bill based on the number of licenses that they've uncovered. And I think the cost avoidance, it's a good idea to get in and have that audit done ahead of time and clean up your environment, because then you can actually have them cleaned up. So if you do have an audit by one of the vendors, they're going to see the leanest environment that you have.
Exactly. Do it internal, or get a consultant to come in that's learning your environment. So he's not saying, well, we can leave this one off the audit. But yeah, we can leave this one off the audit. So he's going to look for everything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And yes, you don't want Microsoft or Oracle. They can come in and do your audit for you, but they're looking at how can we bill you? How much more can we bill you for? If we look at it, we look how many licenses can we reduce? Yeah. Can we consolidate? How much money can we save you on your licensing cost? And it's not just SQL Server. SQL Server has to sit on a Windows or a Linux license. So you're also consolidating these if possible.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Well, John, thank you. I don't see any other questions in here. You have definitely guilted me into opening my cabinet and these 3 extra laptops I've been saving over the years. I now have to throw them out. So that's, if nothing, you're scolding me into getting rid of these extra laptops. So
Yeah, well, we also have to remember the batteries have to be disposed of in a special way.
yeah. Yeah, thank you, John. All right, Michael, I think you are up. Looks like you're ready to rock, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you guys so much, John. That was absolutely fantastic. I don't think about that stuff quite as much as we should. And you've given me pause too, and kind of helped me gain some clarity on what it is to maintain and own a database and multiple database systems, because it's what we rely on you guys to do the most. Sorry, I just want to switch my view here so I can see everybody.
Thanks, sir.
So first and foremost, thank you to Rachel. Thank you to Jen, John, all of you guys for participating and setting this up for CodeBlue to participate in this, because nobody knows this, but we started this process over a year ago. We were grateful to be a part of this back then, and kind of Jen and Rachel have been planning this thing all the way through, coming up with great topics. Great thought leaders through this process. So thank you all for joining us today, and hope to keep that momentum going. Let me make sure I've got this good. Here we go. Perfect. Good morning, everybody. I should be able to see my screen here now. I'm Michael Bergamo. I'm CodeBlue Technology's Business Development Manager. CodeBlue Technology as a company was founded back in 2003, and before 2003, our founder, Trey Hayden, in some consortium members of his, and some great technologists, even earlier than 2003, or back up all the way to the early 90s, really did kind of blaze a trail for what cloud has now become. But back then, they used to call it application service providers, or ASP. That's really where our foundation began as a company. To give a little bit of flavor to what we're going to talk about today. What is cloud? What does it comprise? And as business owners, when you're trying to lead a company through all of the choices that are now available, this highly complex stuff, the expectation has been that everything is becoming simple because everyone needs it. Ergo, it needs to be simple. As John just kind of illustrated, the security, the policies, the procedures, all the things that go into making the cloud work are highly complicated. However, the customer experience should still remain simple. So that's where CodeBlue really does fit, right there in between the gray and the black, trying to make sure that the transition between the two is seamless, it feels seamless, it's managed, it's safe, and it's considered. That's really what today's presentation is all about. But I wanted to give a little bit of flavor for what CodeBlue is, what we do, and how we can help. So fast forward from the early 90s to 2003, CodeBlue embarks on data center, taking individual applications and moving them into the cloud at the time, but really just dedicated servers and great data centers, pairing them with great bandwidth to give to customers that experience of resiliency, backup, security, and really the customer service to say, if the thing is down, if it's not working, if it's not doing what I need it to do, I have somebody I can rely on. That's kind of day one stuff. Moseying on down, we have to figure out, well, is it the right thing? Is it scalable? Is this what happens when I grow? We expect to grow, we want to grow. How do we do that responsibly? How do we know that we're always on the right platform, the right versions of that software? Those are all the things we want to consider. So thank you all again. We'll get underway here. In things that we're going to cover today, I really wanted to touch on just a couple. We're going to break at each one of these just for a quick Q&A. So please, if you have anything, I'm watching the chat as well. Feel free to jump in, and I'll be happy to elaborate on any specific point. Cloud service evaluation. This is the most important thing, as John really did kind of give you the nuts and the bolts of what we consider, meaning versions of software, compatibility. Do we need this? Do we need support attached to that? True cost. We're going to get into all of that. Making sure that the platform that you choose is the one for you, the one that would absolutely solve the most problems. But we know that no system is complete. No system to date is absolutely everything you have to have when it comes to running a business. Maybe not specifically to applications; those are out there and they exist. However, in order to operate fully, I'm talking phone system integration, I'm talking CRM, I'm talking applications, of course, but also all the things that go into running your business. How do you keep track of all that and make sure that we don't clutter up the billings? Making sure that your monthly expenses stay as relatively flat and predictable more than anything as possible. We'll get into that in a second. After that, we're going to get into the X Games. These are my favorite conversations. Back in the early days, we always had hardware. There was a server for every application. There was an expense that went along with it to manage it, to maintain it, to make it secure. And then over time, managed services started to happen. Managed services being antivirus, patch management, these things that take care of the what ifs and the problems, and start converting some of these applications into operating expenses. So when your resources are running low, when your servers are always peaked out, you come in every morning and everything is down and you just don't know what to do, you're always looking at your wallet saying, well, how much is this going to cost? We weren't really planning on this month. More and more of those hardware systems became virtualized. They became cloud-hosted systems, and they became managed by IT professionals that were either augmented in your staff or they were people you could rely on the fly. So out of all of that, we were going to kind of evaluate which things work really well on site, which things work exceptionally well in the cloud, and then and in that model, there's got to be some room for both. So we'll cover a little bit of that. Inside of the cloud consolidation, we're going to go through the hybrid approach where we're going to go through each and every system and make real certain that the things you need on-prem still work on-prem, and there's not a better cloud option, or it would be less expensive to operate in the cloud. We'll go through some cost evaluations in that, so stick around. We're going to compare a couple of the big name guys against CodeBlue's private cloud model. What are the key differences? What are the things to look for while you're shopping? And give you some budgetary pricing on some of that. And then finally, we're going to end on managing the weather. This is my favorite part of cloud services is once you're in the cloud, first of all, how do we get there? What did it cost? And what are some things that if I'm considering either expanding my small cloud footprint, should I worry about if I want to grow? Is there an exit strategy? Is there anything I can do to prevent the world from ending if the cloud that I'm in decides to mosey on down and go somewhere else or sell their business or what happened? We want to take care of all that anxiety. At the very end of that, we'll do some Q&A. So inside of your cloud services evaluation, there are four things that I look for the most, especially when I'm in front of a customer. Anybody that's interested in making certain that the cloud services that they're evaluating are, they're going to make sure they're going to be around for a while. How many checkboxes do I get when I'm looking at them? How many problems am I going to solve with this service? Once that problem is solved, those problems, how big does it go? Should I have to worry about hitting the ceiling on this service? Should I have to worry about them consolidating themselves and maybe I lose some of the support and scale that I had when I signed up? And then support and maintenance. Easily the number one thing we get asked all the time. I got a great price on the cloud server. I got a great price on implementation. However, when I need to call somebody, I get a bill every single time. Something in that service isn't included that I depend on, and I'm really nervous about that. And I want to understand support and management of that infrastructure. Integrations also always at the top of our list when we're trying to figure out which cloud service is best, especially with ours. Making certain that the legacy applications you may be bringing into the organization or carrying over from previous iterations of your organization that need to go to the cloud, how do they function, who supports them, and how do we maintain security at the highest level and make sure that everything kind of jives together. Completeness. This is one of the things that everyone starts off with when they're going to the marketplace to look for something that's going to solve a quick problem. Greatest example I have of this, even pre-pandemic, just somebody looks at you and says, I think we need a meeting software platform, something that takes care of one-on-one meetings, something that we can record, something that we can save for later. How do we get one of those? You go to the marketplace, you look at 25 different options, And each and every one of them has one thing that does something exceptionally well and then a lot to be desired. A lot of times that's kind of where it stops. We say, well, this one's the right price, not really worried about a lot of features, but it'll definitely check a lot of boxes later on, we hope. We want to look at those software solutions for you. We've got a bunch of them that we love already to evaluate with you and make sure that it fits your business, because more than anything, what we really want is to make sure that your people are going to love it, because if they love it, they'll use it. The people that are using it and loving it, we want to make sure that they would become internal advocates of that service and make sure that they're excited about it, so that when it comes time to add one more feature to it, they feel confident they could use it. Teams is the greatest example of this. Microsoft Teams has been kind of flooded into the marketplace over several years. They've grabbed on parts and pieces of Skype, they've grabbed parts and pieces of SharePoint, and they've pushed it into this software package, and they started including it on all Windows computers. I can tell you straight away from the first time I used it, I said, great meeting software. Well, it works really well. It's got a chat function in there. Over time, we've learned the value of that application that some of our contemporaries haven't really embraced yet. File level management, file security, backup, email applications, and integrations to CRMs, phone systems. The list goes on and on and on. But as a complete measure, we want to make sure that whichever platform you're looking at, we want to make sure it can do as much as it possibly can to solve as many problems to prevent the sprawl of these cloud applications, which we'll get into next. Scale. Every time we look at a software application in the cloud, we want to make certain that we're not going to hit the ceiling on that thing day one. A lot of times organizations go in with the intent for maybe 1 to 5 users in a 25-person organization. They say, well, just a few of these people are going to use this. But what happens when it takes off? What happens when all the data that you need for your entire organization starts to leak in there? People love the application, people start using the application. Now we have to look at the number one problem, which is, can it get bigger? And if so, how much is it going to cost? So we want to make real certain that every time we're evaluating something in the cloud, we're paying attention to its ability to grow, both in size, speed, and it doesn't cost you a ton of money to do so, at least not in an unpredictable way. I'm going to move this over just 1 second so I got full view of you guys. Thank you so much. So a couple of questions that we're going to ask of customers, of our own vendors. Does your current solution offer a service at the next tier of performance? Big problem in any kind of cloud-based application. If for whatever reason you want to make sure that you've got, like I said, 5 or 6 people on the platform and it needs to go to the next tier, is there a huge cost difference to go to that next tier? As far as the price break, do we get any kind of benefit from growing with this manufacturer, this vendor? And who's responsible for drawing your attention as the business owner to the fact that there are available options above where you are now that could save you money? A lot of times these vendors won't say a word. They will let you continue to cruise for as long as you want to on the tier that you're on, even though you stand to save a ton of money by moving up. And then of course, the benefits. So what exactly do I get out of this package that I might not get out of the one above, and which ones in the tier above me would I never use? Or if the feature benefits seem like they're great, do I get a chance to try them first, or do I get a chance to see what that is before I have to make a jump and potentially incur some costs? Support. Number one thing, it's why CodeBlue is here today. The support of these applications is becoming more and more of a finger pointing game. A lot of times when organizations have a ton of these applications, single function applications that do 1 or 2 things, when one of those functions break, we call that software manufacturer and say, well, this isn't working anymore, and they will immediately point to the other things that it integrates with. Integration is not a platitude. Integration is very specific in a lot of ways. So making sure that we have the ability to, on your behalf, to go into your applications with you and say, well, what isn't working? Is it actually the network, or is it this application updated and therefore kicked off a chain reaction into some other applications? Going through that with you to make sure that the support is really clear at the front side makes a ton of difference on the back side. So when you have a ton of data in these applications, you don't have to worry about, well, I'm all here now. I've got everything off the boat and onto the island, and now I can't get off, and the support is terrible. That's a huge chunk of cloud sprawl. You know, when we're going out and picking little tiny pieces of value out of the ether, trying to make sure that our applications are the best of the best. When they break, what are my likelihood? What are my chances, and what is the likelihood of having that individual support team tell me it's the other guy? That's where CodeBlue kind of lives in the middle, to make sure that as your IT service provider, you can always call us to say, you know, my Teams call failed, and when we call Microsoft, they're telling us it's the network. Well, who manages the network? Well, we can do that. If the network isn't to blame, maybe it's a systems issue, maybe it's a DNS issue, maybe it's something server side in another cloud application that has nothing to do with Teams whatsoever. You need somebody that can bird dog that for you and quickly get you back up and running. Along with support, and not just the technical support, but also the responsibilities of these cloud providers, SLAs, something that no one talks about. When your data is living offsite off into a public cloud, the SLAs for those are very vague. So depending on the kind of data that you're hosting offsite, making certain that they hold your best interests the highest is not always easy to do. So making sure that you can get the support you need as quickly as possible with a branded partner of that application, we can leverage our relationship with those providers to make sure that you have the best experience possible. And also make sure that they're never talking above you, beneath you, anywhere in the middle there, so that they could potentially not fix the problem, because that's the end all be all worst experience. Integrations. Once you've decided on the right platform, the one that scales with you and the support needs of your organization, you want to make very, very certain that everything that you're adding, be it a one or two function application, also doesn't alienate a previous application that you've been using for a long time. This is super, super common, especially when all of your applications are public, from public companies. So if your phone system from phone system A has been working for a long, long time, but then you integrate CRM XYZ, if they don't fit, there's nothing that either application will do for you specifically to make certain that you're successful. So that's part of our evaluation, to make sure that the next thing that you add into your business isn't going to throw off everything else you worked for up until this point. I'm enormously proud of CodeBlue Cloud. CodeBlue Cloud is an amalgamation of a lot of hard work and a lot of years of experience dealing with these public cloud applications. Our team works feverishly to make certain that everything that you bring to us, be it a legacy application, something from a legacy operating system, or even the new stuff, will work and talk along the lines of your integration needs. So when we're sitting down to do that installation with the engineer, with your team, we're going through your workflow. As a business operator, you're going to tell us, you know, these 5 computers, these 3 users, these are the people that make everything happen around here. We need to make sure that their functions are not interrupted during onboarding, normal operation, offboarding, what have you. We want to make sure that those integrations stick tight. A lot of times these vendor manufacturers create gaps where they've got an idea and it completely satisfies the reason you bought it, but they do create other gaps, other places where they may not integrate perfectly. CodeBlue does work in that gap to make certain that we work together, especially in a support sense, to make sure that everything you're trying to do will work harmoniously. And if it doesn't, what we can do to fix it, to make sure that we can leverage people like Solvaria, we can leverage people and other partners that we have that are exceptionally good at what they do to make certain that those integrations work flawlessly. And they've done that for us countless times over the years. I'm going to break for just a couple of questions. If there are any, I'll take a peek at the chat really quickly. All right. Touching on this a little bit in the beginning, the X Games, CapEx versus OpEx. Everybody operating in a business at some point today has had or has entertained the idea of a server or a single function computer somewhere in your office, whether it's on-prem or if it's hosted, but a single function piece of equipment that has a capital expense, that has maintenance costs, unknowns, pitfalls, upgrades, some kind of change that's going to be necessary 3, 4, 5 years into its existence, and nobody can tell you where it's going to be. Nobody. We're here to tell you that there is absolutely a 50% rise straight up in vertical after year 4 of anything hardware related of risk of failure. That's science, that's physics, that's making certain that the customers understand that when you buy a piece of hardware, that thing has an expected lifespan, and we will do everything we can to keep it healthy and well and extend that lifespan. But over time, that capital expense will start to incur new capital expenditures in terms of support to keep the wellness as high as possible. That's really where cloud services came to bat. Business owners screamed and said, I really love having a server because it's my data, it's in my office, I can see it, I can touch it, I can point to it every single day. The bandwidth that feeds that server I pay for, and I have a great relationship with that provider. The security, I feel like I have a good beat on that. The backups, all the things that go along with that. That really was the only game in town for a long time. Over the years, though, those servers have worn out. The operating systems are becoming expensive. The support to keep those operating systems alive and healthy have become very expensive. And the most we can offer out of all that is making certain that when it's time to grow, we hope that we scale that server when we bought it far enough out into the future so that we don't speed past its total capacity. That was a big deal when CodeBlue Cloud was considered as an avenue of business years ago. We always would get a kind of the knock on the door and say, well, I bought this server for 3 years, but whoops, we grew by 50%. And now that server that I bought won't do it. Do I need another one? Or do I need to expand the storage I have on this individual piece of hardware? What can I do to make sure that I don't have to buy this thing all over again? Because we weren't really planning on that. Or the opposite of that, which somebody bought a server that was going to be good for 3 years. 3 years went by, 4 years went by, 5 years went by, and they never got to 50% of that server's usage. So that was really kind of the cry for help that says we want to pay for what we use. So when I'm growing, I want to be able to move that capital expense into an operating expense, but I also want to be able to operate that out as long as I need it and only be as big as I need it within reason. And if I want to grow, I want to make sure it happens very quickly. We talked a little bit about the hardware sprawl and what all goes into that. Hardware sprawl was the beginning and the precursor to cloud sprawl, but we saw this as kind of the coming storm. It hasn't really made landfall yet, but it is coming. Hardware sprawl, again, we talked about mixed use storage and bottlenecks that come along with having multiple servers doing multiple different things. Single function applications. I think John even touched on it in his talk about vendors that come in and say, I need my own box. I need my own thing, my own box of expenses, effectively. That comes with backups, that comes with maintenance, that comes with a bunch of unknowns, but out of all of that unknown, we do know one thing, and that it all costs money, and eventually it will stop. So we want to understand that expense at the outset, and we want to keep that hardware sprawl as consolidated as possible, and always considered when it's time to move to the cloud to say how much of this stuff that we've amassed over the years do we actually need in the cloud? How much of that can live harmoniously in the cloud without having to incur even more expense in moving? So mixed use, we talked about compatibility requirements. There's not enough to say about that. Compatibility is very simple. When you look at an application, you look at an operating system that's within spec, within date, and within support. CodeBlue is exceptionally good at this, only because we understand Microsoft's rules and regulations, and they're dense and they're vast, but we deal with them every day. So when you're looking at an application, do you care about the operating system? No, you care about whether or not it's compliant, whether or not it's going to solve the problem, whether or not it's going to solve your end users' expectations. Is it going to serve your business? We want to worry about compatibility requirements. We want to worry about parts and warranties. We want to look for the unforeseen things that are coming based on our knowledge and history and experience. That's what we want to try to contain in hardware sprawl. Scale, we also talked a little bit about making sure that we've budgeted for growth, making sure that we've exceeded or met or exceeded all the value of that hardware before it's sunset, and making sure that you didn't outpace your available infrastructure. Hardware isn't going away, but hardware's purposes and use is definitely changing. Before we talk about cloud and living in there forever and always with everything inside, we wanted to put a big red exclamation point on the fact that hardware isn't gone yet. People have to have database applications. Some of them have to live on the land. Some of them have to be in a building. Some people use applications that only solve the problem if they're on-prem. Certain organizations are moving towards this flatter network where cloud-hosted application hardware can live in the cloud, but also those applications that used to live on-prem are now living in a data center instead. The bandwidth between them then becomes the thing that you're paying most attention to. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. Got one question here. It says, what are the risks of SSD drives failing after 3 to 4 years? How can we mitigate those risks? Great question, Pete. Thank you so much. Risk of SSD drives failing after 3 or 4 years. It is a little bit subjective. We have seen, obviously, consumer parts kind of fall into the same price range as old hard drives used to. Their failure rates are similar, but as a rule, enterprise class SSDs are built different. They're priced different as well. Those things are made for read intensity, write intensity, all depending on the application, and we spec those to make sure that when you're deciding on an application that is database heavy, your read-write caches are scaled appropriately to make certain that you're not going to wear those things out in the first year. And there's also super intense intelligence in storage today as well. It's no longer just JBOD, just a bunch of disks, box full of disks. We want to make sure that your applications and your servers, specifically, go back all the way up to the operating system level, are paired and matched inside of this very intelligent box of storage, so that when you're spinning up a database application, we tell the box and the host, this is a database application. So this thing's going to move a ton if it's a hybrid array that has some SSD and some hard disks. When this thing is being beat to death and the database is making 1 million queries a second, we want that server to know that it has permission to the SSD and to only use that super fast storage when it needs it. But when that database is at rest, we want that storage, the less expensive storage, to be where that data lives. If it is a purely database-driven application that's always on and always at its top performance, all SSD is the way to go, and there's a totally separate book of considerations on SSD alone that make that buying decision a little bit easier. And it goes into cost complexity. It goes into the technological throughput between your hosts, your SAN, and your storage switching. We have to do a good bit of math, but all of that depends on usage. So as a whole, SSD failures we see happening about the same in the consumer level. In the enterprise class, we have to marry those with expectations, understanding how you're going to use them. I hope that answers your question. But as far as how can we mitigate those risks, just like that, we have to sit down and figure out what that application is doing all day, the amount of users behind it, and the load. And out of that, we do a little bit of math to figure out over how many years you want it to live, and then pairing that with a manufacturer and a vendor that support those expectations. That leads us perfectly into supported management. Once you've decided on the kind of the hardware expectations that you want to live on in the cloud, CodeBlue provides customers with hardware much in the same fashion we just talked about: highly intelligent storage, highly resilient, highly redundant, all supported at the top level from those manufacturers. So when customers come in and say, I want a server, we have to go through the rank and file to figure out, well, how many users, how hard is that server going to work, what are their expectations for uptime? And just out of those 3 questions, we can glean a ton of information for where you need to be inside of our cloud. A lot of times customers will say, well, I'm not quite ready to live on your island yet, but I'd love a chance to kind of bring maybe the 2 or 3 years I have left on my own hardware with me to live on. I understand there's going to be some kind of degradation in speed because it's going to be somewhere that it's not in my building anymore. We can solve that problem too. But I want to live on my own hardware. What do you recommend? Well, thankfully, CodeBlue Cloud is very verbose in its abilities. We have the ability to host your own hardware. So over time, when that hardware depletes in its own value, over time it's going to die. Over time, it's going to have whatever happens to it happens. And maybe at that point, it makes sense for you to move into our cloud, either as an augmented form of your own, or maybe something that you live on full time. But we have the ability to do both. In most of these platforms, we'll name here in a second, don't have that ability, or they're not well publicized as an ability. But as a consultant, we always want you to feel like you've got control over that data. We want you to go see it, and we're right here in Hanover, and we are also replicated down south in Atlanta. and growing that footprint all the time. As far as the support and management goes of cloud, though, the predictable expenses, the ability to flatten your IT costs, and getting rid of this 3, 4, 5-year guessing game of when that hardware is going to die is our key focus right now. And making sure that the IT talent that we have here is supporting your end users, supporting your managers, so that when they have a problem, they have one phone number to call, not, okay, which application is broken today? Let's figure it out and let's start calling and seeing who's going to take care of this. All to prevent one thing: monthly expense creep. Monthly expense creep has become kind of this, I always equate it to the disaggregation of cable television, where we all say we hate Comcast and we don't want to do it anymore and their prices are ridiculous and all I really watch are 4 or 5 different channels. We just broke that out into 4 or 5 different platforms to buy every month. So we're slowly, that's a great example of hardware sprawl versus cloud sprawl. That's going to happen over time, but the value is there. I think people have voted with their wallets and they said, we really love the ability to pick and choose what exactly we want to move into our own world, and we don't want to pay for anything else. Don't even show it to me. We don't want to see it. But as an experience goes, cloud servers and cloud computing is very similar. We want to make sure that that monthly expense creep for management of that stuff isn't an unknown, which a lot of public cloud providers can't say. A lot of them will tell you great hacks on saving money for living in their cloud, including but not limited to turning your servers off to save money. That was kind of crazy to us, so we wanted to understand that. We did. We kind of boiled the onion on that to understand what their methodology is in keeping that monthly expense down, and we didn't agree with it. We said we believe servers are supposed to be up, they're supposed to be safe all the time, and we shouldn't have to decide whether or not they're on or not in order to stop spending money. So we evaluate the needs of the servers, the livelihood of that data, the importance of that data, and then pair it with great services like backup, patching, antivirus, and ongoing support to make very certain that those expenses are known, they're forecasted, and they're reviewed with you at a quarterly basis. Do we have any questions so far? I want to make very certain we're not going too fast. Perfect. So the meat and the potatoes, how do we consolidate? We're going to talk about integration. We're going to talk about the cumulative cost comparisons. That's taking CodeBlue Cloud against the 2 big guys in the room, figuring out the differences in how we go about getting there. That's the migration management. And then, of course, my favorite part of the consolidation process, which is data security consolidation, keeping everybody not completely independent of where those servers are, but either they're on-prem, in the cloud, remote, or what have you. We want to make sure everybody's singing from the same sheet of music in terms of data security, so we don't have cloud services A is only taken from vendor A, cloud services B, prem, it turns into this, if this, then this nightmare of trying to figure out who's in charge of the security of the whole thing. So integrations. We love freeform platform creation. That doesn't mean that we like everything and anything. That means we love the ability to go into a business, listen to their problem, understand it, and then boil that down into solutions that we know work. That doesn't mean that you've got to fit into this box. It means if you love your phone system, but you absolutely hate the server that you're on, you're worried about it, you're worried about its speed, its capacity, its throughput, what have you, we can take the phone system and help you with that always, but also maintain the server in the cloud and make sure that the 2 of them talk. These engineered integrations between the 2 are key. A lot of times these cloud providers say, well, bring everything you got as much as you can and let's go this way. I can't do that with everything. I have to be flexible enough for you to live where you want to live, but maintain it in the way that you expect. And those flexible hosting options we've kind of branded as bring your own service. So if you have 2 or 3 services that you have to have on-prem and you want to live just your Active Directory and your file level storage, and you want to do that just with us in the cloud, we can do that, knowing that you can migrate to and fro whenever you feel like it, and those agreements are coterminous. And needs-based management. A lot of times, this is where the core business of CodeBlue started, where customers would call and they'd tell us what was wrong, what they were experiencing, we would go fix it. With cloud-based services, we want to make sure that we're managing those in the way that you have us, A lot of times we work with on-prem employed IT managers, people that take care of networks, that network specifically all day, that may not need all the care and feeding of a customer that says, I just want to take care of my business and do my business, and you guys take care of everything else. So we are very flexible in that and making sure that the integration between our team and your team is seamless. Cost comps. I was asked for this in kind of the beginning stages of our dealings with trying to figure out cloud sprawl. And the differences are stark, but so are the offerings. We were asked, and keep in mind before we say anything, Amazon Web Services and Azure are partners of ours. We love them to death. They do great work. They do serve a specific niche and a specific purpose. In John's talk, and I love that, he was talking about development environments and how many of those do we need and how many of those can we scale and what happens when we turn them on and off. For those environments, I think AWS works fantastic. They're very inexpensive to start. They're very inexpensive to turn down, but the long-term costs are astronomical, at least on the front side. Azure kind of flips that. Azure is a lot harder to start up and a lot harder to shut down, but as far as the operating costs, they're not too far out of whack. But both of those platforms are usage-based plus cost. So usage being time, that's cents and dollars per minute, per hour that it's costing you to keep those servers up and alive and well. And they don't include core services in our mind, like backup out of the box, antivirus, patch management, and kind of the care and feeding that we would have behind every server. That's really where CodeBlue kind of steps in and says, we think this is a value add. We think customers don't want servers unless they're taken care of. Development managed servers are typically cared for and turned down appropriately because those are IT people. Those are people that love technology and understand it super well. But for your average business user, your average business owner, they want to make sure that when they're investing in something, they've invested in it, they've invested in you and the customer service that comes along with that, so that no point in time do they have to answer anybody saying, well, you bought a server and then you turned around and took your eye off of it, and now we're compromised. We believe that service should be included with every server, and we did. So we have a fixed cost pricing model, meaning that as you're coming in to servers, you're speccing out how much memory you need, how many CPUs you may need, the amount of storage you may need, and then also the level of service that you expect with that, backups, reporting, all the accompanied security services that come along with that. We want to be very upfront with that at the time of sale, not after everything's been installed. You say, well, who's taking care of X, Y, and Z? You want to be very clear about that. That doesn't mean that your prices never change. It means that over time, as you scale, it's predictable. So you know how much you're paying per gigabyte, per terabyte, per CPU, per memory. All of that stuff is broken out very clearly. It's not time-based. And migration. So if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna put your business in the cloud, you want to make very certain your understanding of what it's going to cost to get there. So we sit down with your team, whoever it is. It could be something. Most of the times it's just the owner, to sit down and understand what it is you expect, to land on those expectations with the right server spec, to make sure that your applications are compatible. If they're not, how do we get there? Because that doesn't end the conversation. And then if and when it's time, how do we schedule that around your business hours to make sure that nobody is left wanting in the end? Sure, I've got this right. We're coming right up on time here, so I want to make sure we're on time. Data security, we touched a little bit on this in the beginning, but as far as the platform goes, when you finished migrating, whose responsibility is it when it's all said and done and moved into the cloud? I think a lot of times the assumption is because I'm in their cloud, the public cloud, whoever it is, they're taking care of me. And that's simply not true right out of the gate anyway. Not without a conversation and understanding of what we deem as data security. We go a step further to say we want to unify that across all your platforms. So taking care of your computers is just as important as taking care of your cloud applications as well, from the server level. So when you call and say, I've got a security concern, we can go through each system and understand what we're doing, what you need to be doing, and consult at the highest level to make certain that when there's a new system coming online, you feel taken care of. And then we can show you, when it's time for risk compliance auditing, we can go through all the systems, even though we may not necessarily, have provided the computers that you use every day. We can definitely take care of them long term. which goes all the way back to our initial managed services offering. We do pair that managed services offering with our cloud computing. I'm going to speed through it one more time. We've got one more section to go through, and I don't want to run out. So once you're in the cloud, what happens while you're here? I think the core focus of cloud computing should have always been service. Managing your cloud environments is why you're there. It's not simply just to get rid of the hardware in your closet or the risk associated with that. That's part of it, but it's definitely not the reason why people do it. I think they really do want the consultation to understand that they're in the cloud, what's coming while they're there. Are there better platforms? Are there newer platforms that we can consider? How do we understand the risk associated with being where we are? And is there anything we can do differently in the future coming up? And then, of course, building those custom solutions. I'm going to pause right there. John, thank you so much for that. So change management, this came about pretty close to the beginning of CodeBlue Cloud, and it's great because we are so hands-on with our customers. We wanted to understand what they expect so that we could land on that perfectly. Onboarding and offboarding, a lot of times these organizations that move to the cloud don't necessarily have a process for either one of those. A lot of times it's just, well, we bought a computer, let's replace that computer and move along. There's security concerns. There are, what do we do with the old data? Do we do anything with the old data? Who's taking care of that? And is this process written down? Customer level change management is a must, especially if you're moving major pieces of your business to the cloud. Keeping up with that. What kind of data lives there? Who has access to that data? And can you render me some kind of a report that shows who has access to that data in any kind of meaningful amount of time? How do we take care of archive? How do we take care of the things that I have to do for data at rest storage, meaning things that live on the cloud servers that may not ever get touched again? They just have to live there for compliance. They have to be there so I can point to them when an auditor walks in and says, show me 7 years of your last, whatever. We have to be able to do that. And making sure that you're on the appropriate storage tier for that data that may not ever change again. That kind of consultation has to be documented so that when it's time to move from live data to archive data, that your costs change, your prices change, and making sure that the documented process for that is known not just by CodeBlue but also by your folks as well. So there's never any question about who's in charge. Budgeting. So when our team sits down with you to go through the building of your cloud application server, maybe it's single function, or maybe your entire cloud application network, we want to always touch base. And we like to do that at least 4 times a year. Our preference is once a month, just to make sure that we stay in sync and we're still on the same page. For customers that are growing rapidly, that time cycle bumps up quite a bit. Just to make sure that we're always in sync, to make sure that your storage and your cloud services are operating at its peak performance at all times, and making sure that we've right-sized that. I've only had one instance, I think, since I've been here where there's ever been a projection that wasn't met that we had to go back down. So we offer that once a year to right-size that. If your business hasn't grown, especially during the pandemic, when people said, I don't think I'm doing anything this year, but I do want to stay and I want to stay afloat. Can we right-size this for today? And we were able to do that, and I'm really proud of that. A lot of cloud service providers won't do that. They'll say, well, this is what you bought. This is what you got to live with. And when we said, nope, we think we can do better than that. The risk management. This is incredibly critical now. It's been since the beginning of cloud, but today more than ever. Making very certain that the risk is known, the risk is pointed at, and the risk is resolved. So anytime, John obviously talked a little bit about this in the operating system game and the shell game of all this, making sure that your servers are within spec, because I love that, kind of the toxic asset in your network. If you have a legacy server that's in hardware that still touches your cloud network in any way, we have to know about it, we have to document it, and we have to show it to you and continue to show it and check in with those application providers to make certain that they are not moving forward, or if they are, what that version may be, so we can put you on the latest version of the operating system. Data at rest scans, this is going to be rampant coming soon because so much data is already now moved to the cloud. Some of that data never changes, some of that data never moves. People take their eye off of it, and that's when it becomes a target. We have software, we have partners that go along with us to make certain that that data at rest is treated the same way as data in motion. Ingress and egress traffic management. This is firewalling. This is agent-based firewalls as well as hardware-based firewalls in our cloud and on your premise. That's expanded even further since COVID to also at home, so that if your users at home are accessing the cloud, their network at home, Xboxes, Facebook, whatever is going on at home is also not encumbering your risk. It's not encumbering your performance. And then compliance checks. Can't say enough about it. Everybody is beholden to somebody, and making sure that you're compliant with that data, making sure that you can render those reports for your binder, be it PCI, be it HIPAA. We can help you with that as well, and especially living inside of our cloud. And always custom solutions. I'm going to wrap this up, but you guys know, I hope at this point, that CodeBlue is dedicated to making certain you are heard. The problem is identified, the problem is solved. We look for those every day. So if you are one, or if you know one, please, please, please contact me today. Our sales department is here and ready to help you. All of our sales engineers are excited to work with you. They want to see you, and they want to understand your business through and through. Not baffle you with technology stuff. That's what we love. We want to hear about your business. We want to hear what makes you excited. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Michael, there's a question in the chat. Do you see that one from
Yes,
Andy?
Yes, thank you so much. Let's see, how to best size cloud resources. When Discovery Tools typically recommend resources based on average usage. As a company, you really want a resource based on max usage? Not necessarily, Andy. A lot of times, max usage is what servers used to be kind of sized for. We would say, how big do we think this is going to be? I think that's what you're asking. But as far as the Discovery Tools, a lot of this is going to be, we're going to piece that story together from the past to see where you've been, and then forecast a little bit for where you're going to go. But with cloud, because we are so dynamic in what we can do with the size of that server and the resources of that server, cloud really did kind of solve that problem, and it makes certain that you're always in the right size, kind of right size box. And if you want to unmute, I'm happy to have a conversation, or we can take this offline anytime. I would love to talk about it with you.
Yeah. Thank you. And also, Johnny had a question about the activities about auditing and consolidation, et cetera. What size businesses are tasked, or what size businesses are appropriate for these type of activities? I will say from our side, from the database services side, we've been brought into single entity organizations or small business and to help them on a much smaller scale. Usually we don't find companies of your size, John, who have 500 databases. It's usually there's a specific issue. The most common issue we get brought into in small business is company is trying to implement a new system, and the vendor says, well, you need a database, just have your DBA spin up X, Y, or Z. And the answer to that question is, well, I don't have a DBA. So we tend to get pulled into those type of issues. But the audit activity, I know with CodeBlue, they have a consolidation, or they have activities that they do that are tailored to small business.
Absolutely. It's really where we started. The original CodeBlue Cloud hosted customer was a couple of doctors and one practice administrator. They came running at us and said, we really don't, because that was originally what cloud was aimed at, was big businesses, and that's why we decided to do it. We said we think the 1 to 5 person business is absolutely should be the target. We've figured out how to scale that to kind of run alongside some of these enterprise level customers, but the beginning focus of this was small business, not just for the price and the scale, but also for the customer service. We always said, we think customers are the key focus to all of this. Computing, the cloud, all that stuff is going to change over time, but we know people just want to do what they need to do, and we want to size it and scale it and price it appropriately for just the 1 to 5 guy as well.
Yep. And yeah, Solvaria, we service large enterprise all the way down to small businesses. So we really cover the gamut. And so it's not one size fits all. It's not a uber expensive. I mean, John's he's on mute right now, but I believe that, audit activities and these audit exercises, and we're not talking months of activity. I mean, these are based in hours, and we are talking not 1 hour, but depending on the size of the company, we've been able to execute audit activities within 30, 40 hours time frame for mid-sized companies. So your experience will vary. Michael's answer to the SSD question is our typical consultant answer, which is it depends. So how long, if the question is how long will it take to audit, the answer is it depends, much like your SSD failing. So, but yeah, it's certainly not a unapproachable subject because you say I'm a smaller business. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. And thank you, John, earlier for your presentation. I'd like to ask Karen and Andy at this point to turn on your microphones and your webcams so we can see your shining faces. And so once again, we have Karen here, who's a fractional IO at Versa. I think we're getting a little bit of feedback. Karen is a fractional CIO for Versa. She is a longtime Solvaria employee, and she runs the IT shop for Versa, and she's been doing that for, Karen, how long has it been now? Gosh, it seems like it's been
almost 6 years.
6 years. Okay. Wow.
Almost, yeah.
Shocking.
In June.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Andy Featherstone, he's a data architect at Retail Data. Data architect is way too small of a title for all the things that Andy does. Andy undertakes a lot of projects for Retail Data and really has spearheaded a lot of business improvement activities for them and keeps that shop running, right? You're the guy. So just, if anyone asks who the guy is at Retail Data, it's Andy. So I'm gonna start out with a question, which is, you've heard a lot about consolidation activities. Has your company done any kind of data optimization or file organization projects and just tell us a little bit about a project that you've done at your entity. So we'll start with Karen on that one.
Sure. So actually, I have multiple clients, and we've done these types of efforts for several clients where they have aging infrastructure and want to move to a cloud-hosted environment to get out of the infrastructure business themselves. And the other thing that we've found is a big benefit is also it improves our business continuity position. So having a cloud-hosted environment takes some of the pressure off of us when it comes to our recovery point objectives, our recovery time objectives, and how quickly we can get up and running, and hopefully even just stay up and running and be more protected from a business continuity perspective. So we've migrated applications to cloud services at AWS and for Azure. And we've also moved to a number of new vendors that offer their own hosted solutions. And in some cases, those vendors have used either their own private cloud within AWS or Azure, or they have started their own cloud service, which they're selling.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, we're actually in the process of a cloud migration. We're also in the process of kind of a data cleanup effort. And so the cloud migration is kind of a lift and drop. Our main goal with that is really to kind of get out of our data center, because we priced it out and it's going to be more expensive to remain in our data center than it is in the cloud. So we're really just kind of picking up our existing infrastructure and putting it down into the cloud on in Azure's cloud, on Azure VMs and whatnot. And then as far as kind of a data cleanup effort, we're a data collection company. We've been collecting data for decades, and we've never deleted a single piece of data. So since the company has begun, we've just been collecting data. So only now, when kind of our data collection is starting to escalate, we've hit this point where we just can't sustain holding this much data anymore. So we're coming up with techniques to archive that data as well as remove that data from our transactional systems, which are hit kind of 24/7. So it's been a huge effort, and I can tell you we could not get it done without Solvaria's help.
Thank you. So let's talk about the whole, let's call it application or report sprawl. Usually if you talk to any typical department and you say, well, we'd like to take a report offline, they usually scream and come at you with pitchforks. Have you done any kind of report cleanup or report consolidation projects because they're simply no longer being used by their employees? And how did you do that without getting pitchforks and torches? Karen?
Yeah, so actually we did a major effort for my Versa client where we went through, we had a lot of reports that we provided to their customers, and they were static reports. We used some web analytics to identify which ones were being accessed frequently versus infrequently. And then the ones that looked like they had little to no activity on them, we advertised in advance that we were going to take them offline. They weren't adding that much value. But the important thing that I think we did was we provided an alternative. So in the case where we were pulling some of these static reports offline, we were replacing them with dynamic dashboards or on-demand reports where they could still access the information they wanted and had a more enhanced experience. So with the dashboards, they could do drill downs into that data. They could identify their own parameters for what they wanted to look at. So it wasn't what we had defined as the report for them in the past, but more met their needs, and also allowed them to do some peer comparisons. So they could compare themselves to other clients based on certain attributes to see, you know, how am I really measuring against this? And then what does that mean for me so that I can reduce my risk paradigm and hopefully reduce my costs for claims.
Thanks, Andy.
So we didn't get any pitchforks, fortunately.
Yeah, we've had a lot of report sprawl. You know, we ran into a situation where pretty much, you know, each business client would say, hey, I want a report that does something a little bit different than this report. So we'd start creating new reports over and over and over again. And it got to the point where our report refreshes were starting to consume too many resources on our SQL servers that we said, okay, we got to do something about this. So some of the reports we simply said, okay, is anyone using this? We determined no one was, so we just kind of, you know, paused it or shut it down for a period of time. And when we didn't get any pitchforks, we went ahead and said, okay, we can delete that report. But a lot of it was also a major kind of educational effort, was to go back to the business and say, hey, I know you've been using this report, but did you realize that this same report will give you that same information if you kind of change the parameters a bit? So a lot of what we did have to do was to go through and kind of say, you know, hey, company, we are going to get shut down some of these reports. We would love to spend some time with you and educate you on how you can get that same information from some of these other reports. And typically you send that email out that says, hey, everyone, we're shutting this down, and no one responds. And then when it's shut down, suddenly everybody's screaming about it. So we went through many rounds of that kind of warning, and then, of course, built in a backup just in case somebody needed something back.
The old turn off and scream. It's we had a financial services client. I was the chief technology officer for this financial services client, and we did that with we looked at their servers, and there were a couple of servers where there was not a single person in the organization who knew what that server was, why it was there, what it did, you know, and it had application that no one had really heard of or used in years and years and years. And one of the old timers was like, oh, I think we use that for X. So we turned the server off. We actually turned a couple of servers off. And 6 months later, one of the employees who hadn't read any of the emails, hadn't been involved in any of the discussions, came back and says, hey, I run this process once a year, and it's on this particular server. Where is it? It doesn't seem to work. And so we were like, uh-oh, okay. So we restored the VM and brought it back, and they ran their report, and then we turned it off again. So we learned a lot on the turn off and scream scream strategy.
We've had that same situation, and we just said, well, you know, if you run this once a year, we're going to build you some kind of an alternative to that, because it's silly for us to keep this thing up for a once-a-year run.
Yes. Yeah, and to make things better, it was an Access 97 application. And you know, as we were upgrading all of our laptops, with Windows, you know, with whatever Windows we were going to, they were like, yeah, my Access application doesn't work anymore. And it's like, okay, well, now we have an even bigger problem.
Speaking of toxic assets,
toxic assets. I love that. I love that word, toxic asset, because it is that's a large enterprise client that we have, but it's really opened our eyes to really thinking about that with other customers and other clients. It's well, why are you running why are you running this SQL 2008 server? Why can't you upgrade? What is preventing you from upgrading? And that started a lot of interesting discussions with people. And again, to the point of replacing hardware, people know that as your car gets older and you put more miles on your car, you have to service it, and eventually you're going to have to get a new car. But when people think about the hardware they bought 5 years ago, they're shocked when you need a new server at some point. And it's the same thing. These products break.
Yeah, well, on the toxic assets thing, one of the cloud migrations that I was working on for a client, it turned out one of their applications ran on XP, and we contacted the vendor and we're like, we need to know what's the latest version of the software operating system. And they had never certified above XP. They wouldn't run on anything other than that. And we tried to negotiate with them to update their software, and they wouldn't. And we replaced the application. It was too big of a risk for us to have XP in an environment.
Yeah, we had a client that was running an XP application, and what we wound up doing was, it was again one of those one user, one application areas. We wound up segmenting that off the network. We put it on its own little, we built a little sub network that wasn't connected to anything else. And that user would physically get up and go to a workstation to use that XP application, because we did not want the risk. So when the auditors came in and took a look at the entire landscape, they're like, oh, well, that XP thing is no longer on the books. So, check the box, make them go away.
Yeah, we've had a big shift in mentality as far as our whole entire company is concerned, which is to say, everyone's always been terrified to say, well, you know what, don't delete anything or don't turn that off, because I might get that one request from that client, and if I can't get them that, then that'll hurt our opinion. And so we've always been terrified to, negatively affect our clients in that way. But the harm that's done sometimes by keeping these old systems around, or this old data around, has been so much it affects us day-to-day basis. So we've had to kind of have that shift that says, well, let's concern ourselves more about our day-to-day work, and when that one client comes back and requests that one old thing, we'll treat that as kind of a one-off situation and handle it differently than keeping these old systems around for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Karen, I'm going to pick on you for a second, which is, you went through a client retention strategy. You went through client retention discussions with one of our customers a little while back. And can you talk a little bit about that process? Because I am sure that there are customers either on this call, or there's people who are out there that may not realize kind of what that corporate retention policy process is like to build and have and maintain.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because a lot of people think it's just as easy as saying, okay, well, we're not going to retain anything older than X. And what you find is that different aspects of the business have different data retention needs. So one of the things that we found very valuable was to talk to the individual departments. For example, at that particular client that you're referencing, they literally had a historian on staff, and it was their job to keep the history of the company forever and ever and ever. And so working with them to identify what specific artifacts were in scope for that, right, versus what things she didn't need to be concerned with from a historian's perspective for the organization. There was a lot of discussion with legal as well. And I think some of the other considerations that people lose sight of, excuse me, one of the things that particular organization struggled with is that there were multiple copies of documents all over the place. And no one knew what was the single source of truth, right? And so it was very important to help design a paradigm for them where there was a master single source of truth that people could access based on their permissions in terms of whether they needed read access or if they needed the ability to modify the data that was in there, and that they could keep version control in place as well. And those were considerations that they hadn't thought of before. They didn't realize until we did that they literally had different departments who were referencing what they thought was the same document that had different requirements in it. And so depending on which department you asked, you got a different answer. So doing that investigation up front, and it does take a lot of work, treat it like a business project where you're going through and defining what your requirements are in terms of who is the owner of the document in terms of that single source of truth? What are the permissions that need to be granted? How do you ensure continuity of the data, right? They were storing things on network shares. Someone would leave the company, their AD account would be deleted and their documents would go away, and then they had lost those. So how do you maintain that persistence that you need to? And then also you need an organization paradigm of how do you classify the documents? How do you organize them so that everyone knows how to find them, if they should have the ability to find them, and then how to make changes to those documents if they are not the owner of that record.
Okay, thank you. So it was more than just having the CIO just lay down the law on how long you keep everything?
Yeah, it was a much more complicated endeavor. And like I said, it turned out that there were some departments, like finance, that had a 7-year retention history. There were other departments that had a 2-year retention policy. And then, of course, automating and enforcing that is the next piece once you have those requirements down.
Yeah. The comment in the chat, Jordan said, I have a client that does funds distribution for state and federal scholarship and data going back to 2001. They have varied retention needs for financial information versus case information for students. That's exactly what Karen's been talking about, which is every department and every requirement is different, but there should be one living, breathing document that says, here are the departments, here are the document requirements, here's the retention policies. Because if you don't have one of those, you can't ever know when you need to clean up.
Right.
I don't know if either one of you, go ahead, Karen, sorry.
I was going to say, even at my insurance client, right, they have workers' comps claim and they have property liability claims, and each of those types of claims have different retention requirements because the state commission has different requirements for workers' compensation than they do for property and liability. So you can't even just call it claims. You have to think of them as the types of claims that they are.
Yeah. I think one of the issues, and Andy, you touched on a little bit, you said you've been collecting data forever and not gotten rid of any of it, is really an archiving strategy. And have you guys endeavored is retail data looking at, are you going into an archive strategy? Are you looking at an archive strategy now, or are you simply going to shift it somewhere else that can retain the space?
Right. The first thing I did when I was hired was to create a data warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a cloud-based data warehouse. And so the first thing I had to do was start to go to some of these, larger data sources and start pulling all the history and getting it stored in the warehouse. And then once I got people comfortable with the fact the warehouse existed, it was accessible, we could pull that information back we needed, then it was a matter of saying, okay, well, let's make a decision on how much data do we want to keep kind of on our premise systems, and then how much do we want to, just rely on in the warehouse. And so that was a huge, multi-month project. Was to go to all the business departments and get agreement that says, okay, we're going to agree to keep 6 months of this type of data, a year of this data, and reassuring everyone that, hey, it's not gone, it's just in a different place. That was actually easier than now what we're going through, which is actually executing on that. So now we're having to go through to these really massive data stores and reduce them. And it's not easy. You think it's, just delete data, no big deal. Well, it's not that easy. So with Solvaria's help, we've been going through a multi-step process as far as reducing kind of this data since we've got it archived elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that part of the problems that companies run into when they are retaining their data forever is the fact that their backups last longer, their applications process slower, the reports run slower. There's a lot of downstream effects that companies wonder. They're like, well, we need new software because the old software has gotten slow or doesn't work well anymore. And, just a small example, we've got a small medical client who called us because suddenly they said, well, last year or the year before, QuickBooks used to run so great in our organization. Okay, well, we don't deal a lot with QuickBooks, but I said I was managing their technology, and so I said, well, let's talk about what they did. Well, they bought an extra business. They merged the two books together. They had never archived off any financial information, and so I said, why don't we take the information prior to 7 years? And so I thought 7 years was too much. I said, why don't we take all that information and put that in a separate file, and then build a new file for the active data, And once we went through that activity, it was like magic. They're like, oh, it opens so fast now. And it's like, well, holding on to all of that data is really what's slowing down your applications. I mean, we have customers who call us because their backups start to creep into the day's operation. So, oh, well, we back up at 2 o'clock every night. Okay, well, if the backup runs from 2 to 6, you're okay. But as soon as that employee comes in at 6:30 and the backup's still running, you've got a problem. And that's we get pulled into those a lot of times. There's another question. What's the right or standard flow for database archiving for a 24/7 transactional database with terabytes of data being stored weekly? John, I'll probably pick on John to come back online for that question. Again, the consultant in me is going to know the answer is going to be it depends, but I have a feeling that that there's a little bit of a there's a little bit deeper answer there. I think my first gut reaction to that is database archiving with terabytes of data being stored. Well, Andy, you've stored terabytes. You're storing terabytes of data. You want to talk a little bit about your process?
Well, that's what we have a nightly process that takes data in kind of live systems, which is the live tables, and moves it to what we have as an archive database. And so that way we keep our live systems trimmed so that, transactions that go through happen quickly. But then we do have kind of views that join our live and archive. So if there are systems that say, I need more than just kind of the last 30 days, I need whatever we've decided 6 months of data, they'll hit that view that gives them that whole access. And then, this archive process, the problem is, again, the delete. So sometimes we have tables that have, 152 million records in them, 200 million records in them, it's harder to delete. So we're building techniques to be able to do deletes throughout the day that won't impact the OLTP work it's having.
Well, and it's kind of an older solution, but I remember a long time ago at one of the companies I worked for, we had a similar issue. And what we did is we built partitioned tables. And so we would have the partitions built on the frequency with which we knew we needed to be able to drop the data off, because when you dropped the partition, it was not a delete statement. So it didn't generate all that transaction volume. And then it would just recreate the view, which was very quick to go over the new partition that you've added with that new data. And that can be an effective process, I think, even today, but John could speak more to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it depends. I had to say that.
It does.
And it is. I mean, it is a true dependence on the requirements of your business. If you need to get all that data there, then the system needs to be designed to perform with that data right at the fingertips of whoever needs to use it. But as we're doing with Andy's group, and as we've worked with multiple clients on, is figuring out what part of those transactions do you really need to keep. One of the biggest problems we see in systems on the database side is logging tables. They're never touched, but they're logging every single transaction. And we've been able to define and devise purging routines that either purge those logs off to an archive system and then deletes them based on a retention out of archive. But it really does depend on the business and what the business needs, because that's our job in the IT community, is to provide the business with a solution that meets their needs. And so we have to define that solution around that. But 24/7, I mean, transactional databases, that's what we do. And yes, we have to look at the data and then determine what's the time life of that data. We've got a system right now we're working on this with, and the database is a terabyte in size, but 900 gigs of it is logging data,
Mm-hmm.
which is not needed.
Yeah. And sometimes customers find that the reason they're storing so much data in their live transactional database is because that is also the same database they're using for reporting. And transactional databases and reporting databases don't always have to live in the same world. And we have a customer where we were able to save them a lot of headache and heartache over their transactional, which we took their transactional data, we replicated them to a reporting database, where we had a different replica, a different archiving strategy and a different retention strategy. So you could run reports for a lot of history, but we know the actual live transaction database, the history only went back a year. But we had everything in the reporting database went back 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So it could be the architecture that you're using right now might need to have an examination. You might need to take a look at it because there may be some options to re-architect. We're coming up on 11 o'clock, which is when we said we would end. I want to thank Karen and Andy for participating in the panel. I want to thank Michael and John for their presentations. And I want to thank Jen and Rachel for helping put all of this together. Our contact information is coming up. If you have any questions, you can certainly email any one of us. If you have requests for the presentation, we are going to publish the recording and we will make that available. And we will also make the slides available once we get them published out. So thank you all. We appreciate working with CodeBlue. And appreciate that we've got great partners, and we also have great customers like Retail Data and Versa that will volunteer their time to help us out. Michael, any other parting words?
Just grateful for you guys, everybody that participated, but definitely for Solvaria. You guys have been a fantastic partner and have pulled us out of some pretty formidable ditches. So we're very grateful for the brilliance you guys bring to the table, and always thinking of us when it comes time to decide on cloud or premise or just IT support in general. We couldn't do it without you. We really appreciate the opportunity to do this.
Thank you, and thank you guys for all the work you're doing with your customers. I know it's always nice to interact with smart IT providers who are trying at the end of the day trying to do best for their customers, which is what you guys do at all turns. So thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.